From Focal Point Radio and Radio Fairfax in Fairfax, Virginia, this is the Mimi Geerges Show. Two women, polar opposites in their beliefs. Both grew up as strict Muslims, but their lives took very different paths. Ayaan Hirsi Ali is a Somali-born former member of the Dutch Parliament. She speaks out very forcefully against the threat of Islam, its treatment of women, and its impact on Western society. On the other hand is Pakistani-born neuroscientist Aafia Siddiqui. Her life centered around the desire to fight jihad against Islam's enemies and to spread the religion around the world. Deborah Scroggins is an award-winning author and journalist. She's written the story of these mirror-opposite women in a book called Wanted Women, and she joins me in the studio. Deborah, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Ayaan Hirsi Ali declined to be interviewed for this book. Why?
I don't know exactly. She never gave an answer, but she just, through intermediaries, said that she wasn't interested.
Do you know if she's reacted to this book in any way?
She hasn't said anything publicly that I know of. Some of her friends, or at least one friend of hers, has written something denouncing the book, so I gather that she's not happy with it, but I don't know for sure.
And Aafia Siddiqui is in prison. Were you not able to speak with her at all?
No. She was missing for 5 years, from 2003 to 2008. And then after she was captured, she was in jail and she wasn't allowed to talk to the media.
Nonetheless, even though you didn't talk to the two major women, you got nearly 500 pages. So this idea started originally as a magazine article about Aafia Siddiqui.
I first read a magazine article about Aafia Siddiqui, and while I was en route to Pakistan to write that article, I learned about the murder of Theo van Gogh, Ayaan Hirsi Ali's collaborator on a short film, and I became interested in her, and she was such an opposite of Aafia Siddiqui, and then I later wrote a magazine article about Ayaan Hirsi Ali as well.
So how did this idea come about that it morphed into a book about the two women?
Well, I just found it so fascinating that these two women who were roughly the same age and had both come to the West at about the same time from the periphery of the Muslim world had gone in such opposite directions, and they were already becoming important to the war on terror. Ayaan in galvanizing sentiment against Islam, and Aafia was at the time alleged to be an important al-Qaeda associate, and I thought if I could follow them, I could learn something important about the war on terror.
Well, let's start with Aafia Siddiqui, since she's less of a public figure and maybe people don't know as much about her. How did she grow up?
She grew up in a very conventional, religiously conservative family, upper middle class. Her father was a doctor. Her mother was a preacher and a social worker in Karachi, Pakistan. And they were very highly educated, and they were determined that their children should get a terrific education, and sent Aafia first to Texas and later to Massachusetts, to MIT, to get her university education.
When did Aafia start to show signs of extreme religious views?
Well, while she was a student at MIT, she became involved with raising money for the Bosnian Muslims of Bosnia and the Mujahideen who had gone to help the Bosnian Muslims in their civil war.
But Deborah, before that, she didn't show any signs of extreme views? It was only in the United States?
Well, before that, even when she was in Karachi growing up, she would go around distributing religious pamphlets and things like that. But she didn't show any interest that I've been able to determine in jihad, except at the time she was growing up in Pakistan was the time of the war against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, the jihad against the Soviets. And she supported, along with millions of other Pakistanis, she probably raised money for jihad as a student. But she didn't show a particular personal interest that I've been able to determine up until she was a student and the Bosnian Civil War came around.
And Ayaan Hirsi Ali, on the other hand, had what I think most people would call a dysfunctional family.
Right. She did. She grew up, her father was an exiled politician, a Somali politician who had gone to Ethiopia to join a rebel group that was waging war against Somalia's dictator then. and he parked his family in Kenya, and that's where Ayaan was raised. But her parents split apart, so it was a broken family, and her mother was somewhat abusive to her. So she had a very difficult and painful childhood.
Ayaan also became very devout.
She did. When she was a teenager growing up in Nairobi, she fell in with a local Muslim Brotherhood group. And she actually writes that she was one of the first women in Nairobi to wear the long jilbab, long veil. Of course, she later changed completely. But
So Ayaan said this, and I thought this was interesting. She said, quote, "It was when I was most devout that I was most full of hate."
yeah.
Did that happen to Aafia as well?
Well, you have to wonder. I mean, one of the interesting things about these two women is that they share the same kind of concept of what Islam is. Although Ayaan has turned against it and Aafia was for it, they both agree that this sort of highly political, conquering concept of Islamism is Islam. And I think Ayaan got that idea from that period when she was a teenager growing up in Nairobi. And that's the period she's talking about in that quote, when she has written that she learned to hate Israel, to hate the West, and to be taught that that was part of the religion.
And they were both they were taught a very visceral hatred of Jews.
That's right. They both were taught a very visceral hatred of Jews. And Aafia has never, well, let me back up a minute. I don't think she hated Jews personally, but she believes that a cabal of Jews is controlling the United States for the benefit of the Jews and not the United States. That's Aafia's position. And Ayaan was apparently taught the same thing, but obviously she completely turned against that, and she's spoken out vigorously against anti-Semitism and tried to bring to light the anti-Semitism that exists in the Islamist movement.
Deborah Scroggins is in the studio with me. She's an award-winning author and journalist. The book we're discussing is called Wanted Women, Faith, Lies, and the War on Terror, The Lives of Ayaan Hirsi Ali and Aafia Siddiqui. Now, Aafia, when she first came to the United States to study, she joined the Muslim Student Association, MSA, which was founded by the Muslim Brotherhood, and it's actually in a lot of campuses in the U.S.
Right.
Should we be worried about that?
Well, I'm told that nowadays the Muslim Student Association, I believe it's actually the largest student association in the world today. So it's actually so big, and it now has every shade of Muslim opinion in it. So I don't think we can see any sort of plot by the Muslim Brotherhood that's controlling the Muslim Student Association today. But when Aafia was involved with it in the early 90s, I think it was a lot more under the influence of the Muslim Brotherhood at that time.
And the Muslim Brotherhood, just so people know, the motto of the Muslim Brotherhood is Allah is our objective, the Prophet is our leader, Quran is our law, jihad is our way, dying in the way of Allah is our highest hope. So I think that would give some Westerners a pause. Aafia moved to Boston to attend MIT, as you said. She started to volunteer for a group called Al-Qifa.
Al-Qifa. Yeah.
Al-Qifa. Who are they?
Okay, they were the predecessor of al-Qaeda here in the United States. The Al-Qifa Refugee Center was based in Brooklyn, and what they did was they helped to send recruits from the United States who wanted to go join the jihad against the Soviets in Afghanistan. They started doing that in the 80s. By the 90s, when Aafia got involved, they were sending recruits to jihads around the world, including Bosnia. And Aafia started out raising money for the Al-Qifa Refugee Center in the 90s for their widow and orphan fund for Bosnia.
And how were they linked to the first World Trade Center bombing in 1993?
Well, in 1993, Ramzi Youssef came from Pakistan, and he began building a bomb with the help of several people, several men who belonged to the Al-Qifa Refugee Center. And they were all involved with his plot to blow up the World Trade Center.
Did Aafia know Ramzi Youssef?
There's no evidence that she did know Ramzi Youssef, but she was at the time raising money for the Widow and Orphans Fund. And even after it was revealed that al-Qaeda members were involved with the World Trade Center bombing, she continued to raise money for it. And she and several of her friends continued with the organization after it moved its headquarters to Boston and changed its name to CARE International. So Boston became the de facto head hub of the al-Qaeda renamed CARE International, which continued to be the conduit to jihad from the United States.
And so it's one thing to raise money for widows and orphans, which is fine, but it's another to be supporting the killing of Americans and innocent people. Did she support the killing of Americans even as she was studying in an American university?
Well, I've never found any emails or any actual documentation from her saying that she was supporting the killing of Americans. But she did arrange for speakers to come to Boston and who, according to her ex-husband, speakers who considered America to be the chief enemy of Muslims. So she was very much aware that at least within CARE International, within al-Qaeda, the members considered America to be the enemy of Muslims.
Aafia goes back to Pakistan. She gets married. They start having children. They're back in the United States. But she never really gives up on this hope of joining jihad.
That's right. When she graduated from MIT, she had actually hoped that she could go to Bosnia and join the jihad. And there were several guys who were active in CARE International who actually wrote to her parents and asked if they could marry her. But her parents didn't agree. They wanted her to marry a doctor, a nice doctor. And so they arranged her marriage to a Pakistani anesthesiologist. And he didn't share her love for jihad. And so she was very frustrated because she couldn't go and join the jihad.
You know, something that struck me, that both women who are around the same age, Aafia Siddiqui and Ayaan Hirsi Ali, at the same time, Ayaan was in Holland taking political science courses and learning about tolerance for the first time really in her life. Aafia was taking Noam Chomsky's class at MIT, learning about conspiracy theories.
Yeah. Well, also Aafia was studying, she was on a pre-med program. She was studying biology. She later told the FBI that she didn't like the sciences at all, but that her parents made her do that, and that she preferred her anthropology and psychology classes. But for whatever reason, she did end up taking mostly science, and so she wasn't exposed very much to political science or liberal arts.
Except Noam Chomsky.
Except for Noam Chomsky. And she was very proud of that. She actually, spoke out at her trial several times and said, "I was a student of Noam Chomsky."
The book we're discussing is called Wanted Women. Author and journalist Deborah Scroggins is in the studio with me. Describe the reaction of both women to 9/11.
Okay, well, Ayaan she had just started working for a Labour Party think tank in the Netherlands. And she describes how she saw some colleagues gathered around a television set, and she heard that it was something in America. And at first she thought, oh, it's going to be another case of the American media overreacting to something. Then when she saw what had happened, she was absolutely transfixed. And as she continued to follow the story, and she watched an interview with Mohammed Atta's father, and she heard what he was saying about Jews, that Jews must have been behind the attacks, that his son couldn't possibly have done it. As soon as she saw that, she said she recognized the note of the Islam that she had grown up with. And she thought to herself, she later told one of her colleagues, I could have been one of those hijackers, because she remembered how she had been taught as a teenager growing up in Nairobi. And so it caused an absolute crisis for her, because she said, is this true Islam? And if it is, how can I remain in it? So that was the crisis for her. Now, Aafia, on the other hand, as soon as she heard about the attacks, she was in Boston, and she immediately announced to her husband that they had to leave and go to Pakistan. And he couldn't understand why. He said, well, let's wait and find out what's happening. And she began to claim that Muslim children were going to be kidnapped. And she didn't offer any proof of this. She just said someone had told her that. But she absolutely insisted that they go to Pakistan. And finally he said, he couldn't leave, and so she said, well, I'm going to take the children and go by myself. And she did that. She managed to get a ticket out and left on September 17th, which, if you recall, was pretty hard to do at the time. She went to Pakistan, and she immediately started making arrangements for him and her to join the Taliban.
And I take it he wasn't all that excited about joining the Taliban.
No, he finally came because for one reason, his parents thought that she was crazy, and they asked him to come and deal with her. So he finally came back from the United States, and Aafia presented him with these tickets, and she wanted him to go join the Taliban. And he told his family, and they said absolutely not. And that prompted another crisis in the family.
So instead of being horrified at the loss of life, and instead of being horrified that fellow Muslims could have done this to the country that she was benefiting from, the United States, she immediately wanted to join the other side.
Well, it may have had something to do with her whole theological beliefs, because Aafia believed that that there was a coming clash of civilizations, and that prophecy told that Islam was going to come into conflict with what she called the Dajjal civilization. The Dajjal is a figure in Islamic theology that's sort of like an antichrist. And so when 9/11 happened, she started saying, do you think it's happening now? Now comes the big clash between Islam and the West. And she wanted to be sure to be on the side of Islam. So
Ayaan Hirsi Ali says this, quote, terrorists weren't hijacking Islam, they were implementing Islam.
That's what she believed, yeah.
Aafia would agree with that.
And Aafia would agree with that.
A lot of people agree with that, though.
Well, it could be.
When did Aafia become wanted in the United States?
She became wanted for questioning in 2003, March 2003, right after Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was arrested. Another man was arrested called Majid Khan, who was a Pakistani-born guy who'd been raised in Baltimore. And Aafia was listed as wanted for questioning just around the same time. And the reason was because the U.S. government had evidence that she had opened a post office box for Majid Khan, and that Majid Khan was an operative working for Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind of 9/11, to enter the United States and carry out a plot to blow up gas tanks around Baltimore.
And this post office box is significant because this kind of eased the way for him to get back into the United States legally.
That's right. He had left the United States without getting a certain immigration document that he needed to re-enter the country. And so when he apparently agreed to go on this mission for Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, he found out that he didn't have this document. And he needed a mailing address that he could receive this document in order to get back in the United States. And so Aafia was dispatched to the U.S. to open the post office box to mail the immigration documents that would help him be able to get back in the U.S.
Deborah Scroggins is in the studio with me. The book is called Wanted Women, Faith, Lies, and the War on Terror, The Lives of Ayaan Hirsi Ali and Aafia Siddiqui. What do you think made Aafia Siddiqui so threatening to the United States?
Well, I think that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and his family were the most dangerous terrorists that al-Qaeda ever had. They were responsible for the 9/11 attacks. They were also responsible for the first attack on the first bombing of the World Trade Center and dozens of other attacks. And Aafia, what the U.S. had learned about Aafia was that she had fallen into their orbit, that she had become part of their inner circle. She had actually married the nephew of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, a young man named Ali Abdul Aziz Ali. And so when they found that this highly educated scientist was actually involved with the family of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, they became very nervous indeed.
And nervous as well, thinking that maybe she was involved with chemical or biological weapons.
That's right, because there were some indications that this plot to blow up the gas tanks, that there were other indications that they might also be interested in poisoning the water reservoirs, or there were other indications that there might be a chemical or biological weapons involved.
So Ayaan Hirsi Ali has gotten many, many threats against her life. Her collaborator, as you said, Theo van Gogh, was murdered in broad daylight in Amsterdam. What do you think makes Ayaan so threatening to Muslims around the world?
Well, I think she's very offensive to Muslims. Many Muslims are very offended by what she has to say about Islam, because she's made a number of statements. She said that Islam is a nihilistic death cult, things like that. She said Islam, even in its nonviolent form, is dangerous. She's also made statements about the Prophet Muhammad. She said that he was a perverse tyrant. So all of that is highly offensive to Muslims.
But it's one thing to be offensive, but another to have so many death threats that you would actually have to always have a bodyguard with you and always have protection.
Well, I think in the Muslim world, those kind of comments have often led to death threats.
Aafia went back to Pakistan. She got divorced and then went underground. Where was she and what was she doing? This was between about 2003 and I think 2008 when she was finally arrested.
Yes, absolutely. Well, that's a source of great controversy about where she was and what she was doing. But what she told the FBI after she was captured in 2008 was that she spent those years on the run. And that she lived in various places. She lived in Karachi. She worked as a lab technician. She also was involved with researching chemical and biological weapons for a cleric in Karachi. So that's what she told the FBI. Now, millions of Pakistanis don't believe that. They believe that her confession was coerced and that she was actually in a secret prison all those years. I have not been able to find any evidence to support that, but millions of Pakistanis do believe it.
They not only believe she was in a secret American prison, but that she was being raped and tortured for those 5 years.
That's right, because her family have alleged that in the Pakistani press repeatedly.
So what happened when she was finally arrested? She was found in Afghanistan, actually.
She was found in Afghanistan under very mysterious circumstances. There had been a report in the town of Ghazni, Afghanistan, that a woman was traveling around speaking to Afghan women, encouraging them to become suicide bombers. And around that time, some merchants outside of a mosque in Ghazni noticed a woman in a burqa sitting down beside the mosque reading with a boy. And they thought that this woman might be a suicide bomber. So they called the police. When the police came and started to question the woman, they found that she had a bag full of papers, handwritten papers, written in English, Urdu, and Pashto, that included diagrams of weapons, maps of Ghazni, all kinds of things. So they took her into custody. They took the papers over to the local American base to show them, since some of them were written in English, they thought she might be an international terrorist. And the Americans were extremely interested and sent a team from the FBI to question her. When the team went into this room where they thought they were going to be meeting some of the Afghan police to talk about whether they could have access to the woman, there was a curtain in the room. And what they didn't realize is that the woman was behind this curtain and she was unsecured. So one of the Americans put his rifle, later he testified at her trial, he put his rifle down beside him as a gesture of respect for the Afghans to take off his weapon. And just within seconds, the curtain flew open and the crowd, the assembled Afghans and Americans saw that the woman behind the curtain had picked up the weapon and was firing it into the crowd. The American spun around and fired his pistol at her, shot her in the stomach. So she didn't hit anybody, but she herself was hit. They rushed her off the base, and then they eventually flew her to Bagram Air Base to be operated on, and that was when they discovered that this woman was actually Aafia Siddiqui.
Do you think that she was in fact planning an attack on the U.S.?
I don't really know. At her trial, the documents that she was carrying are still classified. But obviously the defense saw the documents, and so did the judge, and so did the prosecution. The defense alleged that these documents were mostly kind of like ravings, that they weren't really serious scientific documents. But without seeing the documents, it's really hard to know.
So she was actually tried and sentenced based on her shooting American soldiers and not the terrorism stuff.
That's right. She was only tried and convicted for attempted murder and assault of American soldiers and personnel in Afghanistan. She has never been tried on terrorism charges.
Okay, so Deborah, I've waved my magic wand, and you get to talk to both women, and you get to ask one question. Let's start with Ayaan.
I would ask her about her views of Islam. I would ask her if her views have changed in recent years, because I wonder if her experiences since she's come out with her book and she's had a lot of correspondence and reaction, I wonder if her ideas about Islam have changed or moderated at all.
What about Aafia?
Aafia, I would ask her about her views on the United States. Why, as you said, a country that really showed her nothing but hospitality, she came to consider as an enemy.
What do you think is the most important lesson that we as Americans can take from the stories of these two women?
Well, the thing that I found fascinating and sad about both of their stories is that they started out, both of them, talking about women's rights, but they eventually kind of slid away from that, and everything became subsumed in a conflict between the West and Islam. I'm sorry that that seems to have happened to the whole issue of women's rights in the Muslim world in general, has been subsumed by the war on terror.
Deborah Scroggins, she's an award-winning author and journalist. The book is called Wanted Women: Faith, Lies, and the War on Terror, The Lives of Ayaan Hirsi Ali and Aafia Siddiqui. It's published by HarperCollins. Deborah, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
That's our show for this week. Email me your comments or questions to feedback@mgshow.org and join us on Facebook and Twitter. You can support this program through a variety of ways. Just visit mgshow.org and click on the link that says support. Thanks for listening. I'm Mimi Geerges, and I'll be back again next week.